So I cut some of that foam up that I was going to do to give me my box section, and I've shaped a little piece up, you can see there. So that's pretty much the little stubby piece that I'm going to need. So that's pretty much the design, and that's all it's going to be. So hopefully that sits actually quite nice in there. So if I centralize it on the plate, you can see where it's picking it up from. Really, it hasn't really sort of grabbed the motor from the body as such. I'm going to make another plate to come off. I think I'll make a stabilizing plate to come off there, so that'll probably flex, I would have thought, on the overhang. So that sits nice, that does. I'm happy with that, so I'll probably go with that on this side. With this side, it was clear that the bolts were going to be in the way of the fixing bolts on the upright of the angle on this side. I guessed it might, but I could see it was when I just tried to put it on the other side. So what I did is I've taken that off now, and what I did is I've seam welded all the way around, and I've also plug welded the holes. I've drilled some extra, so these were the original 3 fixings here that I've plug welded. I just need to tidy them up because I used a bit of aluminium on the back of that, so I just need a bit of a refilling on the back. And I've seamed it all the way around, and also I drilled some extra 8mm holes. You can see these 2 here and these 2 here, and they've been plug welded. I only drilled through the top plate, so it's been plug welded straight onto the back of the angle line, so I'm sure that's more than adequate. Plus I've seam welded it all the way around on the inside and the bottom. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to tidy up the welds. I'm going to get the flat wheel, make it all flat, and then I'm going to refit that back to the motor, and then we can carve the next one up. I'm hoping that one line up with this one. I hope there won't be much difference in it. I'll try and keep them the same, the proportions. So let's get this finished up and flat wheeled, and then we'll come back and see how this looks. Flat wheel flat now. So I've just took the front surface down. It's still burning hot. I've just been welding and grinding it. I'm going to leave the back side like that. I don't think it interferes with anything. So there's me plug welds on the back. I think that should be ample strong. So I'm going to let that cool down a little bit, and I'm going to reattach that now back to the motor, and then I can see how cut my next little stubby piece for the support. Insulation molds, I think I've got as good as I'm going to get them. That's how I've positioned them. So this one wasn't really happy with, but this one unfortunately falls right in line with the resolver plug, so I've had to drop that one down a little bit, otherwise it's going to foul with the plug. And also it's overhanging the angle part there, so what I'll probably do is just cut a piece of steel up and weld it in behind it, as well as an extra support if it's needed. So those are the 2 little pieces now. They're quite short and stubby. I mean, if they're not 100%, the welding will take up the slack. So I think what I'm going to do now is set up I've got a metal cutting bench saw, and I'm going to use this slightly thicker box section. This is the one I bought originally, and this is the one I had a piece of in the garage. It's a bit rusty, but I can clean it up. I can squirt some like rust converter down the tube after I cut the pieces up. So I think I'm going to transfer my foam insulation to the 2x2 square now. I think this is 5mm, the wall thickness of that. I think this is 3mm, if that maybe. So we'll come back. I'm going to go ahead and chop those up, and we'll come back when I've got those 2 pieces cut. Well, I use my metal blade for cutting steel, and I've chopped the box sections. So this is what we currently, the state we look at the moment. So they're the 2 box sections now, cut and just laying there now. Got quite a good fitment on those, so that's going to be their final resting place once they're welded in. Let's have a look at a top view down. So I might need a bit of fine adjustment, but that's pretty much it now really. The thing I'm concerned about is how much compression there'll be once these are welded, and then because I've really literally got like a 10mm gap between the subframe and the bottom of the motor. I'm thinking what I might do is I might just wind up the motor. I might do 2 complete revolutions on the handles there, and that will give me like an extra 2 or 3 mil, because I don't know what it's going to squish down to. So I think I'll do that, and then what I'm going to do is give these a clean up and try and tack them in situ to start with. And when I'm happy with that, I'll just release the fixing bolts and then drop out the subframe and weld them all, seam weld them right round, both top and bottom. So I think what I'm going to do now is crank those up, give those a good clean, and then I'm going to fire up the welder and try and see if I can just tack them in position. So I've put a few tacks on that now, so where I can see, which is pretty much only on 2 sides of each part. That's actually made it pretty rigid now. That's not going anywhere now. I mean, obviously I won't rely on it taking off the hooks yet, but I might try and get a couple more tacks on that top side, I think. Well, the welding extravaganza is now done. So obviously I removed it from the car once I tacked it, and I've gone over the welds 2 or 3 times in places just to get a good thick weld. This thing was red hot for ages. I couldn't touch it for a long time, it got so hot, the metal. So you can see, we can clearly see I've gone through it there a couple of times. If you can get a good idea on that one. Did have trouble getting the welding tip into that, to be honest. I just let the wire come out and I just aimed it at it. But I think that's more than ample strength wise. Looks like a TV stand gone wrong. Looks like a TV stand from the guy that made that. Maybe I can join the same factory. So I'm happy with that. That's pretty much welded up now, the TV stand. Also, to make my life easier, because it's God help trying to get this thing apart afterwards once it's all assembled. And obviously once the subframe's reassembled with all the suspension, that's not really going to be an easy option to drop the subframe every time if I ever want to get the motor out for whatever reason. I suppose it'll have to come out from the top, really. I don't know, anyway, that's another story. But what I did to aid me in disassembling the motor from its mounts and everything, rather than trying to get top and bottom to undo nuts and bolts, I've looked where I needed to just weld nuts or bolts in situ. That way it'll be easier for me just to, so obviously that will get dropped back in its fixings there, and I can just bolt it straight up from the bottom, and the same, that can be bolted straight through from the top side. So hopefully that's aided me in disassembling and reassembling for the future. So I'm happy with that. That's all done. That's nice. I need to start thinking about priming parts up, really, because it's just like raw steel at the moment. Might just get some epoxy primer and just leave them in primer for the time being. So we'll come back when I've just welded that one up. I've still got to drop that one off and weld it up. So the ends are now fully seam welded. Let's have a look at the welds. So this is the so I've gone ahead and seam welded the joints. I've probably gone round it 2 or 3 times. I've got a nice big fat weld seam welded all the way around that, and on the plate as well. That's my weld in there. So that's one of them. Went ahead and trimmed off a bit of the fat on this plate. But also, this one's quite a long run plate. It may twist or warp, I don't know. So what I went ahead and did was I fitted this like bracing part. I've just welded like a fin onto this. You can see I've got good heat penetration through there. So that's that one finished. These are actually quite heavy now, these. There's a lot of metal there. So I trimmed down these plates. These were more sort of, so I've tried to cut off as much excess as I could, because also I couldn't get the welding head in this part, so I had to trim that edge down to get that done. So these are now completely finished as far as I can tell. What I want to do, I want to loosely put everything back together now, bolt it all up, and then literally just release the chains so it sits on its own weight of the subframe. So let's get back on and get on and do that. Both plates are now buttoned up, so they're both been refixed back to the motor now. As you can see, they've got the support parts on them, motor mounts. So what I want to do now is just make a little support bracket just to take, there's quite a bit of overhang on that part of the plate. So I've literally just found in my box of offcuts an angle piece with a hole in it, which was quite good. Flat piece with a hole in it. So I've just cut it. That's literally just sitting there now. There's not much metal to work with there. So what I'll do while it's in situ, I'm going to just tack it. Hopefully it will stay in position. Then I'll just take this off completely again and fully seam weld that all the way round. So that will give me an angle support then to keep that part rigid in case it starts flexing slightly on the front, although I shouldn't think it would. It's all going to be bolted up. And down the bottom there I had to put a stud in because when the subframe goes back in there wasn't much space to get a bolt in there, so I'm going to leave a few millimetre overhang on that bolt there. Zoom in on it a bit. I'll give it a few millimetres extra and I'm going to cut the excess thread off that. I've Loctited the thread into the motor there. I've wound it, there's quite a bit of threading going into the motor, and I've put some liquid thread lock on it, so hopefully that will stay. So I've welded up the support bracket now, the angle arm, so that's all fully seam welded all the way around, so happy with that. I'm not going to bother putting an extra brace on it. I don't think it's necessary. It's more, I don't think it's not going to have any sideways movement on it. So, and it's quite a substantial piece of metal I've welded on there. It's probably like 5 or 6 mil thick. The whole thing's getting quite heavy now, to be honest. So, so what I want to do, I want to stick that back in there now, bolt it all up. I want to get under the car, cut that thread down. Then I want to put the subframe back in, lock up the motor mounts on the rubbers, on the bushings, and then hopefully we can take the weight off the chains and see how we're getting. So we'll come back when we're ready for that. Well, after spending nearly 2 hours trying to get the motor mounts lining up and fitted, things were like 99% there, but I couldn't quite get the bolts to line up. Then in my wisdom I realised maybe I've got the bottom mounts, because they're all just being custom drilled. For some reason the bolts were nearly perfectly right on the subframe, but I switched them round and everything fell into place after that. So that was a lot of time wasted there, unfortunately, because I had to keep cranking the motor up and down to get all the got to get up and down, constantly get the bolts in and out. And so it's just literally buttoned up now. I've just literally just chuck any old nuts and bolts on it, all M10s. So I'm going to set up on the tripod now, and I can't do this one-handed. I'm going to release the chains now, and hopefully the weight will sit on the motor mounts. Right, tally-ho. Right, the motor is now sitting on its own subframe, minus the chains for a change. So that's pretty rigid now. That's sitting there all good. Let's get underneath and look at the gap. So that's the gap I've got. 1.5 centimetres there, maybe, if that, maybe 1 centimetre in places. I mean, if the worst came to the worst, I could probably grind part of the motor away if it does foul. I can't see why it would. So the motor mounts are now finished. Hurrah! Time for a cup of tea, I think. So let me know in the comments what you think. Is that a good setup? You think that'll do the job? I can't see any other way of doing it, to be honest, because I really am restricted. I would like to have picked it up in the middle of the motor, but I'm restricted because of where these where the steering part is, where it mounts on there. So let me know what you think. I think it will work. Time will tell, I suppose. So that's it. The motor mounts are now finished. So I think the next stage will be now is put it back on the chains and take it all apart again now, because I've got bare metal parts there now, and what I tend to do is go on ahead and do other projects and they just sit there for ages and then they just start getting surface rust on them. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take it back apart again now. I'm going to prime and paint all the subframe joint, all the subframe parts now, the motor mount parts that are bare metal. Probably just do them in black, chassis black, and also because the subframe's on its own now, I need to start rebuilding the subframe. All the subframe parts, all the suspension is all just propped up in the garage in the corner there on the floor. That all needs stripping down. Could be quite an expensive and long process now. I might just do little quick videos of what's done. There's plenty of videos out there on restoring suspension parts. Please comment and like, hit the subscribe button, helps the eBay algorithms, and we'll see you in the next one. And don't forget your tea and your wonky motor mount. Thanks for watching.